Hello and welcome back to Be a Quirky Writer. Now, last time I discussed Heroes of Might and Magic 3 and my love for that game. So I decided that it was a correct moment to also talk about the other entries in the series, since the franchise does have about 7 of these games. Bear in mind that in my opinion the third one is still the best out of all of them. And I might not be the only one thinking this, so let me share some stats with you as well. On Video Game Insight, you have this interesting raw data which suggests the average player base in the last 24 hours. So, judging by that, you have Heroes of Might and Magic 5, which had about 350 players in the last 24 hours. Not bad. Then you have something like Heroes 6, a little bit less good, 230 or 40 players, acceptable. Heroes of Might and Magic 7, on the other hand, still a pretty solid game, 450 players in the last 24 hours. Fucking impressive for a 10-year-old game. Now let's check Heroes of Might and Magic 3, shall we? In the last 24 hours, a game that is 25 years old still managed to have 2,500 players. And that statistic might not be quite accurate. But hey, to each his own, right? So anyway, on to the video and on to my opinion about the other entries in the franchise. Heroes of Might and Magic, a strategic quest. The first of its name, published back in 1995. My original intention was to gloss over this title by putting on screen an image that simply stated footage not found. However, I did discover that you can actually play the game directly from your browser. So yeah, take a look at these beautiful dead pixels. You know, it is fascinating to think that there are games out there that at the time were so advanced and yet today can be played online, almost like your Flash games back in the early 2000s. Anyway, this game is the canonical beginning to everything. In the land of Enroth, where 4 factions, based on either might or magic, battle for victory. I have little to add or say about this title in particular, other than it feels like the precursor to a game that I played for a lifetime, as it should be. All of the building blocks are there. Heroes of Might and Magic 2, The Succession Wars, featuring the tale of 2 brothers fighting over the rule of the kingdom erected in the previous game, as the title hints towards. The brothers represent the 2 antithetical forces, good and evil, and also gives a certain alignment to the city factions. Knights, sorcerers, and wizards being the good guys, and necromancers, warlocks, and barbarians being the bad ones. I mean, poor barbarians, they just want to smash and bash some skulls. Why is bonking considered such a bad thing? Now, I'm gonna be real with you. I tried to install this one on my computer. My PC just couldn't bear the thought. I mean, just look at some of these specs. A 486 processor, 95 megabytes of free space, and a whopping 8 megas of RAM. How the times have changed, right? Anyway, I do fondly remember this game because it was the one that my father used to play before Heroes of Might and Magic 3 eventually came out, which, that game, as you might know, grabbed my full attention. Regardless, Heroes of Might and Magic 1 and 2 by 1999 sold a combined total of 1.5 million copies, which is quite an impressive feat for such a game. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 was published in 2002, the last one made by Studio 3DO and New World Computing. Here, things get a little bit iffy. The first 3 games follow a pretty standard formula, and the other entries, however, historically, the even-numbered ones were a bit stranger and more peculiar, not quite everyone's liking, and the odd-number ones were the ones that were heavily influenced by the third installment and are overall decent games. And let me give you an example of this with Heroes of Might and Magic 4. In the 4th installment, the factions have been changed a little bit, so now we have life, order, death, chaos, nature, and might. These are also the names for the magic schools within the game. Thematically, these seem to fit adequately, but something just feels a little bit off. One good thing that they added is the simultaneous attack, which is a good mechanic all things considered. Add, however, to that the fact that the map readability is pretty harsh, and that the hex system of the battlefield has been removed, and that now each faction has 2 primary units to start and then the choice between 2 different tier 3, 4 and 5 troops, and you get a more experimental approach. One interesting and unique system that was implemented, however, is that your hero now is part of the roster of troops. He is on the battlefield and can be killed by other armies. Now, a doubt arises. If the hero is functionally only a unit, can you have multiple heroes in one single army? Yes, the answer is yes. So of course, one of the things that I fondly remember trying out at the time was making an army consisting only of heroes. Is this a good strategy? Fuck no, considering that the more heroes you have in your party and the more XP you will need to level them up, and the slower it will be. Is it, however, hilarious to just go to an enemy castle with a party of 6 heroes, no troops, and be like, Avengers Unite? Of course it is. So was Heroes of Might and Magic 4 good? Well, not exactly, but I can't say it was horrible either. It was an experimental phase, where developers tried something different, some novelty ideas that were however not appreciated as much. You have however to consider that it had to contend with a title that was arguably a perfect game. Comparing Heroes 4 with Heroes 5 simply isn't fair. And here is where things start getting interesting. In 2003, Studio Fridio sold the rights to the Heroes franchise to Ubisoft. Heroes of Might and Magic, as such, had a small rebranding and became, with the Collector's Edition and the following iterations, the new and reforged Might and Magic Heroes. Yeah, drastic changes, I know. Anyway, Might and Magic Heroes 5 takes everything that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 did and polishes it to a whole new level. New graphics, new 3D models, a decent UI, a leveling system for the hero that actually feels more complex and refined, and even some slight adjustments to various game mechanics. I don't know, such as necromancers having a limited amount of creatures they can resurrect each week and not an unlimited supply of them. Still pretty busted as fuck. The map, in my opinion, seems just a little bit harder to read, but it is still serviceable. My problem is that it still feels a little bit like a copy of the 3rd installment, and there is nothing wrong with that, let me be clear. It is by all means and purposes a good addition to the franchise. I would however argue that there is still a reason that I would still choose Heroes 3 over Heroes 5, and that may be simply nostalgia or fondness. Heroes 5 notably brings back the battle grid, lost with the previous experimental phase of Heroes 4, and we don't want to talk about that, and also adds the possibility of choosing between 2 variations of upgrades for your units, and that is a pretty good novelty that they add. As far as factions go, we still have your standard humans, now referred to as Heaven, the Demons or Inferno, Necropolis, Sylvan, Dungeon, and Academy. The 2 expansions that came out with Heroes 5 later on then added Stronghold, or your Raging Barbarians, and Fortress, or your Runic Dwarves, the second faction being a little bit of another novelty that was added. Each faction with their own unique castle and aesthetics, they do a pretty good job of recreating or re-envisioning the pre-existing ones from Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Dungeon is the only one that stands out a bit, replacing some of its previous units with more humanoid creatures. All in all, Heroes 5 is a pretty solid game indeed. Oh boy. Remember when I said that the even-numbered entries in the franchise are the ones that usually tend to be more experimental and where they try things and those things don't quite work out? Yeah, about that. In Heroes 6, an attempt was made, don't get me wrong, but oh brother were they off mark. It features a minimalistic approach that, however, takes away part of the strategizing and customizations that previous iterations had. Consider that heroes no longer have specific skill sets, so you just end up picking what's best. Speaking of minimalism, there are only 3 types of resources other than gold. You have wood, ore, and crystals. And that is kind of a lazy way to do things in my opinion. It made sense for different factions to require more or less of a certain type of resource. It gave them a certain thematic depth. Speaking of factions, in the sixth installment you start with 5: Heaven, Inferno, Necropolis, Sanctuary, and Stronghold, with the expansion adding only one more to the roster: Dungeon. I do appreciate, however, that an attempt was made to create something new here. One faction in particular, Sanctuary, represents a seemingly Japanese aesthetic, with the creatures being folkloristic yokai. I guess we finally reached the point where we have weeaboo developers, and that is perfectly fine. But that simple novelty does not remedy all other choices in the series, and Hero 6 just kind of misses its mark in my opinion. Hey, at least it has several cinematics within the game, as opposed to a bit of a screw up they did in Heroes of Might and Magic 7, which also brings me towards my conclusion. Now, I'm a little bit conflicted by this one, just because Heroes of Might and Magic 7 is overall a good game, one that takes inspiration from Heroes 5, but there are still several things that just make me want to complain. It's in my nature. So here's a fast list of things that irk me. They didn't even bother to animate the initial cinematic. A still frame of the characters talking and the camera moving around, and that is all you get. Yes, you could consider it a bit of an homage to the style of the first ones, but come on, I mean, even Heroes 3 had a bit of movement in the animation. I just consider this a lack of effort. Speaking of lack of effort, the town depiction is static. At least in the fifth installment, you could move around and see your town in 3D. There's no in-game random map generator, but that is nothing new to be fair. Some of the soundtracks also feel a little bit cartoony. I cannot be playing the Skelly Boys, the Necromancers of the Underdark, and just hear a Looney Toony bit OST in the background. That is just a no-no from me. Also, one of the weekly events within the game utterly disables your ranged units, and that is just bullshit. I feel it like a bad game design. That is just me being salty, to be fair. Also, they reverted the resource system, but what is with all the new names? Instead of the classic sulfur, mercury, gemstones, and so on, now you have star silver and dragon blood crystals and dragon steel and shadow steel. Just why? Do you think that just giving exotic, fancy, fantasy sounding names makes the game better? I don't know, man. Personally, I just feel it like a little bit of a needless tryhard, but that may be just me. With all that being said, however, Hero 7 still has some redeeming qualities and good playability, and it is still vastly superior to the 6th installment, but I would still pick the 5th one over the 7th one. And considering that I would still pick the 3rd one over the 5th one, that is pretty much where I'm at with this whole shebang. On a last note before I go, Heroes of Might and Magic Olden Era, technically the 8th installment in the franchise, is set to release sometime in 2025, still under Ubisoft but developed by Studio Frozen. They previously worked on Miratus, which was still an okay strategy game but quite different from the Heroes saga. From the few images that they revealed, the graphics seemed a little bit cartoony to my taste, but I will refrain from judging them beforehand, and of course I will eagerly try it out. Anyway, that's enough from me. Don't forget to breathe, don't forget to smile, and don't forget to make like 57 different save files, that way you never know which one to load, as gamers do. See you in the gaming world, until next time.